without further ado, let's head into our What the Papers Say segment. And as usual, joining us for that are our two usual suspects. Chris Hall is the editor at Cybus Issues and Heather Mackenzie, editor at the Daily News at Cybus. Nice to see you all. Looking a lot more rested today, I have to say, even though you were telling me that you went out last night.
I went out, yes.
You went out last night. You were working hard.
Same old grind till about 2 o'clock last night.
Okay, same old grind, putting the paper to bed. Let's start with some of the comments that we heard yesterday. A lot focused again around regulation. It's quite interesting. A lot of the sessions that we've heard so far, even though if they weren't addressing regulation, regulation kept coming up time and time again. And we had a comment yesterday from David Wright. He is the Secretary General of IESCO. And let's have a listen to what he had to say. Very intriguing.
I think financial institutions should pay far more attention to corporate governance and tone and ethics, ethical behavior. If you assume there are 10 people on a board, there's a choice, isn't there, between having 500, if the average age is 50 years, you can have 500 years of experience and challenge on that board, or you can have 10 poodles. And what we've seen in this crisis is that there were too many poodles.
Okay, so I told you it was going to be entertaining, and of course, Chris, you actually, on the front page of the paper, you were covering both of those, regulation and also compliance as a global issue as well, which sort of feeds into that. So tell me your reaction to what you heard from David Wright.
Well, this is certainly one of David's kind of big campaigning issues, really. I think since he's taken over at IOSCO, he feels that that if one sets the tone right at the higher level of the organisation, then that kind of filters through. That's very important. And I know that he's also a supporter of the idea that regulators should make it known if they're unhappy with the management structure, the board structure of financial institutions, so that if roles are combined in a way that they feel is inappropriate, or if they feel that there isn't sufficient experience and bite on the at the board level, then that's something that the regulators should feel free to to step in and comment on.
I think some of the themes that have come through this week as well is about rebuilding trust, and particularly in the community amongst just citizens rather than with other clients of banks. And the idea that corporate governance should be important, I think, is very interesting. And given the protests that you've seen in Europe and unrest elsewhere about the results of the financial crisis, where a lot of people lost their jobs, lost their savings, the banks have to be aware of the fact that the regulators are going to be really tough on them, and that there's a reason for that.
Well, we had a lot of conversation as well here at Cybus 2012 about people in Asia, bankers in Asia, saying that the regulators need to be a little bit more flexible because the same rules that apply for Europe and the US may not necessarily be needed as the strength of those rules in Asia. But he did speak yesterday in that session talking about the fact that, yes, a little flexibility, okay, but I'm not for any more than that, because obviously everybody needs to start dancing to the same tune. What do you think of that?
Well, I think he was, the comment that David was trying to get across was that we have to have globally agreed principles, that we all need to be, agreeing to the same framework, and of course there does have to be a certain amount of regulatory flexibility. He did point out that it's not only Asia that had a different experience over the crisis. Anglo-Saxon economies, Canada and Australia had a different experience as well to Europe and the US, Latin America again. And it's interesting if one looks at those countries, they had crises of their own prior to the kind of Lehman Brothers collapse, and so they were already similar to Asia. They were already kind of prepared, and their banks were much more adequately capitalized, and so Wright felt that it was reasonable for us to look at the global regulatory sphere to see where we could learn lessons, and that element of flexibility clearly is one that's necessary.
Let's just pick up on a couple of things that you've been running in your paper, Heather, the Daily News at Cyber. So just draw your attention to this story here. Banks hear customer care tips from the car makers. So taking lessons of best practice from the car industry.
Yes, that was one of the more unusual presentations in the Standards Forum, and it was the speaker made a very good point about the fact that in the automotive industry, when it came to something like safety standards, that the car manufacturers spoke to the consumers a lot, and they actually took it from that point of view, and he said that the financial institutions could do the same thing, as to have a bit more of a kind of customer focus on what they're doing and the kind of standards they're implementing.
It speaks to some of the things that we've been hearing here on Cybers TV when they were talking about, what SWIFT can do, what could the regulators do, what could the bankers do, and a few of the people that we mentioned, even some of the bankers said, we need to have some of those MNCs around that table, some of those customers around the table, because we all need to be involved to choose something that will be efficient for everybody.
Well, you could argue that at Cybos, you could have consumer groups, consumer sort of representative bodies could put their case forward as well. Yes.
Yep. Another one that we're going to pick up at the moment is banks and telcos working together for the long haul. And we've heard quite a lot about that. I mean, it's come from a place where initially banks and telcos were almost in competition with each other and worried that they were each going to eat each other's lunch. And now there's a feeling of more collaboration between those two groups.
Yes, there's a big theme that runs through the financial industry now about collaboration, and it's interesting because, as you say, historically banks and telcos viewed each other with great suspicion, but the mobile banking area is one that there's a lot of opportunity that people see, and they've realised that neither party can do this on their own, and that you cooperate and you will actually end up being able to develop services, again, that consumers want.
One of the things I wanted to pick up with both of you as well is we had that in conversation yesterday with Benoit Cœuré from the ECB, and I know there was some news overnight. Tell us a little bit about that, Chris.
Yeah, well, it was interesting that Cœuré was going into some detail about the ECB's operations in order to support the euro and to kind of provide funding to support the countries that are in trouble. But it seems that those operations are going to have to continue for some time to come. After it was reported yesterday that the Greek budget forecasts were kind of more dire than any of the IMF forecasts. So I guess Benoit is going to be busy for some time.
Okay, well, we'll leave it right there. Thanks very much to both of you for joining us.